Somewhere, in a cave in South Africa, 13,000 years ago, archaeologists found something strange. Tiny pouches, made of reed, packed with seeds. Not food seeds, not medicine in the way we'd recognize it. The seeds belong to a plant that, when burned and inhaled, sends the human brain into an altered state. We like to imagine our ancestors as simple survivors, hunting, gathering, sleeping when the sun went down. But the deeper archaeologists dig, the more they find evidence of something else entirely. Humans deliberately, repeatedly, and ritually altering their own consciousness. Long before alcohol, long before agriculture, long before writing. So when did humans actually start taking drugs? The honest answer might shock you. Probably before we were even fully human. Today, we're digging through ash, pollen, residue, and bone to trace the oldest high in history, and what it tells us about why the human brain has always wanted to leave itself behind. Let's start with the hard evidence, because it's older than almost anything else we associate with civilization. At Border Cave in South Africa, archaeologists discovered bedding made from grass, and woven into it, residue from the Cryptocarya woodii plant, a mild psychoactive insect repellent that doubles as a sedative. That bedding is at least 77,000 years old. Older than cave paintings, older than the bow and arrow, older than spoken language as we understand it today. But the most direct evidence comes from a place called the Cape of South Africa, where researchers found those reed pouches stuffed with charred mesembryanthemum seeds, what locals still call kana, a plant chewed and smoked for thousands of years to produce euphoria and a sense of connection. Carbon dating puts this use at around 13,000 years ago, right at the edge of the last ice age. And it goes back even further. Some anthropologists argue that our taste for altered states predates Homo sapiens entirely. Neanderthal sites in Spain have shown evidence of psychoactive plant residue on cooking tools. If that holds up, it means another species of human, one that wasn't even us, was already experimenting with mind-altering substances. In other words, the human brain didn't wait for civilization to invent drugs. It went looking for them almost as soon as it had hands free to pick the plants. Here's where it gets genuinely strange. Life 13,000 years ago was brutal. Every calorie mattered. Every hour of daylight was survival math. Hunt, gather, defend, repeat. So why would a species fighting for its life waste time and energy chasing a high? The leading theory among anthropologists is that altered states weren't a luxury. They were a tool. Many of these early psychoactive plants were used in group settings. Not solo escape, but shared ritual. When a tribe took a mild psychoactive substance together around a fire, something happened that mattered for survival. Social bonding intensified. Hierarchies softened. Strangers from neighboring groups felt safer trusting each other. Anthropologists call this the social lubricant hypothesis. The idea that altered states helped strangers cooperate at a moment in history when cooperation between small bands was the difference between thriving and dying out. There's also a darker, more practical layer. Several early psychoactive plants doubled as painkillers, parasite repellents, or sleep aids in a world with zero modern medicine. A plant that numbed pain after an injury, calmed an anxious mind before a dangerous hunt, or helped a grieving parent simply make it through the night wasn't a vice. It was medicine, the only medicine available. So the high wasn't separate from survival. Now here's the part that connects directly to something deeper about being human. Across nearly every ancient culture we've studied, from Siberian shamanic traditions to South American ayahuasca ceremonies to the opium poppies found in 6,000-year-old Sumerian tablets labeled literally as the joy plant, altered states were almost never private. They were ceremonial. There's a reason for that. The human brain, when pushed into an altered state in a group setting with music, firelight, and shared expectation, tends to interpret the experience as spiritual or meaningful rather than purely chemical. Anthropologists call this set and setting. The idea that the same substance produces wildly different experiences depending on who you're with and what story your culture has told you to expect. Ancient humans built entire belief systems around this. Visions seen during altered states weren't dismissed as hallucinations. They were treated as messages from ancestors, spirits, or the natural world itself. Cave art in places like Lascaux in France shows imagery anthropologists believe may depict trance states experienced by shamanic figures, half-human, half-animal forms that some researchers link directly to altered consciousness during ritual. In this light, the earliest drug use wasn't about getting high for fun. It was one of humanity's first attempts at answering an impossible question. What is beyond the world we can normally see? Here's a twist that surprises most people. Alcohol, the substance most associated with ancient parties and modern drinking culture, is actually one of the newer arrivals on this list. The oldest confirmed alcoholic beverage comes from Jiahu, China, around 9,000 years ago, a fermented mix of rice, honey, and hawthorn fruit. That sounds ancient, but compare it to the 77,000-year-old sedative bedding, the tens of thousands of years old psychoactive plant use, and possibly Neanderthal experimentation. Alcohol is, relatively speaking, a recent invention. There's even a theory called the drunken monkey hypothesis, which suggests our attraction to alcohol isn't cultural at all, it's evolutionary. Millions of years before humans existed, our primate ancestors were drawn to overripe, fermenting fruit on the forest floor because it signaled a fast source of sugar. The slight buzz from natural fermentation wasn't the point. It was a side effect of chasing calories. Some scientists believe that ancient attraction to fermented fruit wired our brains, long before we were even human, to find that particular chemical pleasant. So when agriculture finally gave humans surplus grain about 10,000 years ago, we didn't invent a new desire, we just industrialized an old one. Beer may have even been one of the reasons humans started farming in the first place. Some archaeologists argue early grain cultivation in the Fertile Crescent was driven as much by the desire to brew as the desire to bake bread. Alcohol didn't start the relationship between humans and altered states. It just became the loudest, most socially acceptable guest at a party that had already been going on for tens of thousands of years. So why does any of this matter? Because it reframes a question we usually get wrong. We tend to ask, why do people use drugs? As if it's a modern failure, a symptom of broken lives or broken societies. But the archaeological record tells a different story. Altering consciousness isn't a deviation from being human. It might be one of the oldest, most consistent behaviors of being human at all. Every culture we've ever studied, on every continent, independently discovered some way to chemically step outside ordinary awareness, whether through plants, fungi, fermentation, or smoke. No one taught humanity to do this. It emerged again and again, in isolated populations with no contact with each other, almost like a universal feature of the human nervous system, rather than a cultural accident. That doesn't mean every choice around substances throughout history was wise or safe or harmless. Addiction and harm are very real, then and now. But it does mean the impulse itself, the pull toward altering the mind, isn't a modern glitch caused by stress or boredom or easy access. It's ancient. It's been with us since before we had permanent homes, before we had written language, possibly before we were even the only species of human left on Earth. We didn't invent the desire to change our minds. We just keep finding new bottles to put it in.